Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
They said faster-than-light communication was the cornerstone of civilization. They said a species without quantum entanglement networks was barely sentient. They said humans would never survive the void between stars. They were wrong about the last part. Dead wrong. And Lieutenant Marcus Webb was about to show them exactly how wrong, using nothing but light, desperation, and a communication method older than their entire empire. The Verath didn't understand silence. Their entire civilization hummed on quantum frequencies, thoughts transmitted instantaneously across light years through entangled particles that defied what humans still called physics. To them, communication wasn't a technology, it was biology. Every Verath was born with neural pathways that interfaced directly with the quantum mesh, connecting them to every other member of their species in a vast, singing network of consciousness. So when the human mining operation on Theta 7 went dark, the Verath assumed the humans were dead. Primitive radio waves, council member Shatek had said, her crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. They still use electromagnetic radiation to speak across their own planet. It's like watching insects tap antennae. The assembled council rippled with what might have been laughter. On the holographic display, Theta 7 rotated slowly, a rust-colored rock rich in heavy metals that humanity desperately needed for their creaking, pathetic attempt at a jump drive. The mining station clung to the asteroid's surface like a tick on a dying animal. The solar flare was Category 9, another council member observed. Their equipment couldn't possibly have survived the radiation burst. Should we send a recovery team? Someone asked. Shatek's form shimmered, the Verath equivalent of a shrug. For salvage, perhaps. The humans will already be dead. They lack our network, our resilience. 37 of their hours have passed since the flare. Their primitive suits hold oxygen for 48 at most. They might have reached the shelter, which requires their radio network to coordinate, Shatek countered, which the flare destroyed. Humans cannot function without their crude spoken language and slower-than-light transmissions. They will have panicked, scattered, died alone in the dark like the isolated creatures they are. The council moved on to other matters. Humanity's mining contract on Theta 7 would be reassigned to a more capable species. The Verath were efficient that way. No sentiment, no waste, just cold optimization across their perfect, connected empire. But Shatek was wrong about the humans being dead. She was also wrong about them being isolated. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had exactly 11 minutes of air left in his emergency suit when he realized nobody was coming. The mining station was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The solar flare had hit like the fist of an angry god, and the electromagnetic pulse had turned every piece of electronic equipment into expensive scrap. The HAB modules had depressurized. The communications array had melted into slag, and 17 miners had been outside on the surface when it happened. Marcus had watched 5 of them die in the first hour. Their suits' seals had failed, or their air recyclers had stopped, or they'd made bad decisions in the panic and burned through their oxygen trying to run back to a shelter that didn't exist anymore. He'd seen Ramirez stumble and fall and not get up. He'd seen Chen's suit readings flatline on his heads-up display before the display itself died. He'd stopped watching after that. Now he crouched in the shadow of a mining excavator that had been knocked on its side by the flare's kinetic shockwave. The machine was dead. Everything was dead. His suit radio produced nothing but static. The emergency beacon he'd activated was screaming into the void on a frequency no one would hear because every relay satellite had been fried. 11 minutes of air. Marcus looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there. The Verath were probably already writing obituaries. Primitive humans couldn't survive without their technology. Such a shame. Next item on the agenda. His heads-up display flickered. Down to 10 minutes now. He thought about his daughter. Emma was 7. She'd drawn him a picture before he shipped out, all stick figures and crayon suns. "Come home safe, Daddy." She'd made him promise. 9 minutes. Marcus stood up. He wasn't going to die crouched in a shadow like a scared animal. If these were his last minutes, he'd spend them doing something. Anything. The excavator's cockpit was accessible through a manual hatch. Marcus hauled himself up the side of the overturned machine, his gloved hands finding purchase on maintenance handles. Inside, the cockpit was a mess of shattered screens and dead controls. But the excavator was old. It's built by humans who understood that sometimes electronics failed and you needed backups. Mechanical backups. Marcus found the manual override panel behind the pilot's seat. He cranked the lever that separated the excavator's battery array from its fried control systems. Then he found the maintenance laser. Every mining excavator carried one. They were used for precision cutting, for boring through rock too hard for the drill heads, for welding repairs in the field. This one was a heavy industrial model designed to cut through 3 meters of solid iron in sustained bursts. Marcus pulled it free from its housing. The laser was about the size of a rifle, with a manual trigger and a brightness setting that went from precision cut to small sun. 7 minutes of air. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from cold. And the suit's heating elements had failed an hour ago, and Theta 7's shadow side dropped to 200 below zero. He could barely feel his fingers, but he could still pull a trigger. Marcus climbed back out of the excavator and hauled the laser up to the highest point he could reach. From here, he could see the orbital plane where the Verath monitoring station sat, a distant gleam of light against the stars. They'd be watching, passively, efficiently, waiting to see when the last human vital signs flatlined. He pointed the laser at that distant gleam. And then Marcus did something the Verath had never seen before. He started sending Morse code. 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. The universal distress call, invented by humans more than 200 years before they'd ever left Earth. A simple pattern. They're designed to cut through static and interference, recognizable even when every other form of communication failed. Marcus's fingers were numb on the trigger. Each pulse drained the excavator's battery a fraction of a percent. He had maybe enough power for an hour of continuous transmission. After that, the battery would die. After that, he would die. But for now, he could send light across the void. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then he started sending coordinates. The mining station's location, encoded in the same simple pulses his great-great-grandfather might have used on a sinking ship. ... dash dash dash, ... The laser's beam was invisible in vacuum, but Marcus knew it was reaching out. A thin finger of coherent light stretching across 40,000 kilometers of space. And on the Verath monitoring station, alarms didn't sound because the Verath didn't use alarms. But junior technician Ralvek noticed the optical sensor spike and felt a flicker of confusion pulse through the quantum network. "Sensor anomaly," she reported to the collective consciousness. "Point source light emission from the human mining site. Irregular pattern." "Debris reflection," someone suggested through the mesh. The flare scattered reflective particles. No. Ralvek isolated the signal, ran it through analysis protocols. "This is directed, focused, laser frequency coherent light. The humans are dead," Shartek's presence reminded her. "You're seeing equipment malfunction." But Ralvek was young, and the young sometimes made mistakes like being curious. She recorded the light pattern, fed it to the station's archives. "I cross-referenced it against known human technologies, and found something very old." "It's a language," she said, her confusion bleeding into the quantum mesh. "A primitive communication method. They called it Morse code." Silence in the network. The Verath concept of silence anyway, which was more like a held breath across a million minds. "Translate it," Shartek commanded. The pattern resolved into letters, letters into words. SOS, coordinates follow. 17 survivors. Oxygen critical. Station destroyed. Require immediate assistance. Then the same message repeated. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Again, again. Impossible, someone said in the mesh. Their communications array was destroyed. The electromagnetic pulse should have... They're not using their communications array, Ralvek interrupted, and which was extremely rude in Varath culture, but she was too fascinated to care. They're using a mining laser. They're manually pulsing it. Someone down there is sending this by hand. The network rippled with disbelief. For how long? Shartek asked. Ralvek checked the timestamp. 43 minutes. The same message, repeating continuously. One of them is using their life support power to manually signal for help, another council member observed. That's remarkably inefficient. It's working, Ralvek said quietly. The mesh went silent again. Down on Theta 7, Marcus had 4 minutes of air left. His fingers had gone completely numb. The suit's internal temperature had dropped to the point where ice was forming on the inside of his faceplate. But the excavator's battery still held charge, and his hand still worked the trigger. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He thought about Emma, about her crayon drawing stuck to his locker door in the station that didn't exist anymore, about how she'd made him promise to come home. 3 minutes. The laser pulsed. On, off, on, dot, dot, dot. Marcus had been a communications officer before transferring to mining operations. He'd learned Morse code the old-fashioned way, from an instructor who'd learned it from an instructor who'd learned it in the ancient Earth navies. It's obsolete, the instructor had said, but you learn it anyway, because the day everything else fails, you'll still be able to send 3 short and 3 long. 2 minutes. Marcus's vision was graying at the edges. Hypoxia. His body eating itself, trying to survive on air that wasn't there anymore. But his hand kept moving. Dash, dash, dash. On the Verith station, Shartek made a decision she would spend years trying to understand. Deploy emergency response, she commanded. Fastest possible trajectory. The humans have 48 hours of suit oxygen maximum, someone objected. It's been 37 hours, even at maximum burn. I'm aware of the mathematics, Shartek cut them off. Deploy anyway. May I ask why? The question rippled through the mesh, colored with genuine confusion. The Verath didn't waste resources on lost causes. Shartek watched the light pulse. On, off, on. A human down there, dying in the dark, using the last of their power to send a message nobody should have been able to send. Because I want to understand, she said finally. What kind of species does this? Marcus's air ran out at hour 38. He'd stopped feeling his fingers at 39. His vision had tunneled to a narrow point at 40. At 41, he'd started hallucinating Emma standing in front of him, asking why he'd broken his promise. I'm sorry, baby, he tried to say, but his throat was frozen and the words came out as a wheeze. The laser kept pulsing. His hand had locked on the trigger. Muscles frozen in place, tendons rigid with cold and oxygen debt. He couldn't have stopped signaling if he'd wanted to. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. At hour 42, Marcus stopped breathing. At hour 43, his heart stopped. But his hand, frozen on the trigger, kept the pattern going. Physics and rigor mortis conspiring to send a dead man's message into the stars. The Verith rescue ship arrived at hour 47. They found Marcus first because he was still transmitting, still pulsing. The excavator's battery had outlasted him by 5 hours. Ralvek was the one who found him. She'd insisted on coming, which was unusual for Verith. They didn't normally care about being physically present for anything. The quantum mesh let them experience events through the sensors of any connected device. But she'd wanted to see this human with her own eyes. Marcus was frozen solid, his suit rimed with ice, his hand still locked on the trigger. The laser was still pulsing. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He's been dead for 5 hours, the medical technician reported. Oxygen deprivation followed by thermal shutdown. Should we retrieve the body? Ralvek reached out and gently moved Marcus's frozen hand away from the trigger. The laser stopped pulsing. The silence felt wrong. "Yes," she said. "Retrieve all of them." "How many others?" 16 more humans in various sheltered positions, all in critical condition but alive. They appear to have found intact sections of the mining equipment and used remaining air supplies collectively. "Because he told them where to go," Ralvek said quietly. "I don't understand." Ralvek looked at Marcus's frozen form, at the laser, at the excavator's battery display showing 3% remaining charge. "He didn't just send an SOS," she said. "Scan the full transmission log." The technician accessed the optical records. The light pattern resolved into thousands of pulses over 47 hours. Not just one message, dozens. SOS coordinates, then detailed instructions to the other survivors. Where to find intact air supplies, how to manually operate emergency systems, how to create a survival shelter using unpowered equipment, mathematical calculations for rationing oxygen. Everything they would need to stay alive without communications, without power, without hope. All sent in light pulses, all composed by a man dying in the dark. "He saved them," the technician said, something like awe creeping into their voice. "Yes," Ralvek said. "He did." She thought about what Shartek had said. Humans can't function without their network. They panic. They die alone. This human had died alone, but he'd made sure the others didn't. "Council member Shartek," Ralvek transmitted through the quantum mesh. "I need to report something about the humans." "What is it?" The elder's presence felt impatient. "We were wrong about them," Ralvek said. "Not about their technology. We were right that it's primitive, but we were wrong about what that means." She transmitted the image of Marcus, frozen at his post, hand still on the trigger. "They don't need our network," she continued, "because they already know how to reach each other in the dark. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. They just use light instead of quantum entanglement." In the quantum mesh, Shartek's presence went very still. "Bring them all home," she said finally. "The living and the dead, and bring that laser. I want to understand how they did this." Ralvek carefully disconnected the mining laser from the excavator's battery. As she lifted it, she noticed something scratched into the barrel's side. Human letters, crude but readable. Emma's dad. She didn't know what it meant, not yet. But she would learn, because the Verath were wrong about humanity in ways they were only beginning to understand, and Ralvek had just decided she wanted to know everything about the species that could speak across the void with nothing but light and stubborn refusal to die quietly. The funeral happened 3 weeks later, and the Verath didn't understand that either. They understood death. Species ended. Individuals ceased. Resources were recycled. But the human concept of a funeral, of gathering to acknowledge a cessation that had already occurred, of performing rituals for someone who could no longer perceive them, it made no logical sense. "Ma, they're using valuable time," observed Council Member Threnkit through the mesh. "The mining operation must be rebuilt. The survivors require medical treatment. Yet they insist on delaying everything for this ceremony." Shartek watched through the station's external cameras as the 17 survivors assembled in the recreation bay that had been hastily repressurized. They wore their dress uniforms, what the humans called their blues, formal attire for formal occasions. Marcus Webb's body was there too, recovered but not revived because human biology didn't work that way. Dead stayed dead for them. Ralvek stood at the back of the assembled Verath observers, her presence quiet in the quantum mesh. She'd spent the last 3 weeks studying everything she could access about human communication methods. Morse code was just the beginning. Humans had dozens of ways to speak across distances: flags, drums, smoke, light, sound, even touch. An entire species that had evolved to shout into the void because they'd been born alone, each mind isolated in its own skull. It should have made them weak. Instead, they'd built languages. "The human commander is speaking," someone noted in the mesh. "Commander Sarah Chen, no relation to the Chen who'd died in the first hour, stood at a podium that hadn't existed 4 days ago. The survivors had built it from salvaged materials. Another thing the Verath didn't understand: humans building objects for single-use ceremonial purposes. Chen's face was composed, but Ralvek had learned to read the subtle tells of human emotion. The tightness around the eyes, the set of the jaw, and the way her hands gripped the podium just slightly too hard. Grief. That's what humans called it. A response to loss so fundamental, they had hundreds of words for its variations. Lieutenant Marcus Webb died, Chen began, her voice carrying through the bay. So that we could live. The survivors stood at attention. Some of them were crying. Ralvek had studied that too. The human response of leaking salt water from their eyes when emotions exceeded some invisible threshold. Inefficient. Beautiful. Incomprehensible. He had 11 minutes of air left when he started transmitting, Chen continued. The Verath medical team confirmed he continued transmitting for 4 hours and 36 minutes after his oxygen ran out. That means for 4 hours and 25 minutes. Marcus Webb was sending us instructions while suffocating to death. One of the survivors made a sound. A sob, the humans called it. The others stood perfectly still. He told us where to find the emergency air caches. He calculated oxygen sharing ratios. He identified which equipment was still functional and how to operate it manually. He gave us a rally point. He organized a survival plan for 17 people across a 12-kilometer radius of destroyed mining station. And he did it all by blinking a laser on and off. In Morse code, a communication method that was obsolete before humanity even left Earth. Chen's voice cracked. Just slightly. She paused, visibly composed herself. Marcus used to joke that the old ways were the best ways. He'd break out his manual navigation charts when the computer worked fine, just to prove he could still plot a course with a compass and a ruler. He learned celestial navigation. He studied semaphore. He said... Another pause. Longer this time. He said that the day we forgot how to communicate without technology was the day we stopped being human. I thought he was being paranoid, old-fashioned, stuck in the past. She looked at the flag-draped container that held Marcus's body. I was wrong. We all owe him our lives. And the debt isn't just that he saved us. It's that he remembered what we'd forgotten. That humanity survives not because of our technology, but in spite of it. Because we refuse to stop talking to each other, even when every logical system says communication should be impossible. Chen stepped back. Another human stepped forward. Rodriguez, the mining engineer who'd spent 3 days sharing his air supply with 2 others because Marcus's transmission had told them where to meet. I'd like to read something, Rodriguez said. His voice was rough. Marcus had a daughter, Emma. She's 7. Before he shipped out, she made him promise to come home. He kept a picture she drew taped inside his helmet. He held up a piece of paper. Even through the camera feed, Ralvek could see it was crude. Child-level artistic ability. Stick figures under a yellow circle. The picture shows 3 people, Rodriguez continued. Marcus, his daughter, and his wife who died 2 years ago. Emma drew them all holding hands under the sun. She wrote, "Family forever" at the top. Marcus used to look at this picture every single day before his shift. Rodriguez's composure shattered, just for a second. Then he pulled it back together through visible force of will. He died alone on a frozen rock 40,000 kilometers from the nearest living person. But he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about 17 strangers who needed him to stay alive long enough to tell them how to survive. That's what humans do. We hold hands across the void, even when it kills us. The ceremony continued for another hour. Humans speaking about Marcus, telling stories, crying, laughing at memories, performing their incomprehensible rituals of grief. The Verath observers watched in collective silence, processing implications that didn't fit their models of behavior. Finally, they moved Marcus's body to the airlock. Then Commander Chen performed what she called burial in space. ejecting the container into Theta 7's weak gravity well, where it would eventually spiral into the asteroid's surface. "Fair winds and following seas, Lieutenant," Chen said, her hand raised in salute. "We have the watch." The 17 survivors held their salutes as Marcus Webb became a falling star. 3 months later, Ralvec requested something unprecedented: permission to study at the Human Communications Academy on Earth. The request rippled through the Verith quantum mesh like a stone dropped in still water. Confusion, concern, outright disbelief. "You want to learn primitive communication methods?" Shartek's presence in the mesh carried multiple layers of incomprehension. "Why?" "Because they're not primitive," Ralvec answered. "They're resilient. The humans have backup systems for their backup systems. When quantum communication fails..." "Quantum communication doesn't fail," someone interrupted. "It can be jammed," Ralvec countered. "It can be disrupted. The Kresh have been developing quantum interference weapons for decades. If they succeed, our entire network could collapse in seconds. We'd be deaf, blind, isolated. We'd panic because we've never existed in isolation." "A theoretical concern?" "The humans exist in isolation every second of every day," Ralvec said. "Each mind is its own island. Yet they built civilization anyway. They created languages, writing, mathematics, art, music. All of it methods to bridge the gap between isolated consciousnesses. They've spent their entire evolutionary history solving the exact problem that would destroy us." The mesh went quiet. You're saying we're vulnerable," Shartek said slowly. "I'm saying we're dependent. And dependency on a single system is a vulnerability the humans eliminated thousands of years ago." Ralvec transmitted the data she'd compiled. Human communication methods throughout history. Drums in Africa that could transmit complex messages across hundreds of kilometers. Smoke signals visible for miles. Naval semaphore that could coordinate fleets when radio silence was required. Morse code that worked through walls, across wires, through light, even through touch. "They can speak to each other through anything," she continued. "Sound, light, touch, written symbols, electronic pulses, quantum entanglement. They learned our method in less than a decade and integrated it into their systems as just another tool, not a replacement for everything else. An addition to an arsenal they've been building since they learned to make fire." "This is why Webb succeeded," Shartek said. "Yes, he succeeded because failure wasn't the end of his options. It was just the beginning of his improvisation. And I believe..." Ralvec hesitated, which was unusual in the quantum mesh where thoughts typically flowed unfiltered. "I believe we need to learn how to improvise." The council deliberated. In the quantum mesh, deliberation happened at the speed of thought. Millions of perspectives analyzed and synthesized in seconds. But this decision took hours because it touched something fundamental: the admission that the Verith might be wrong about something important. Finally, Shartek's presence coalesced into decision. "Approved. You'll study at the Human Academy. You'll learn their primitive methods. And you'll teach us what you learn, because if the Kresh succeed in jamming our network, we need to know how to scream into the void the way the humans do." Ralvec felt something she didn't have a word for in her own language. Gratitude mixed with anticipation, mixed with fear. The humans would probably call it excitement. "I'll need a human name," she said. "Their instructors require it for enrollment." "Choose one," Shartek said. Ralvec thought about Marcus Webb, frozen at his post, hand on the trigger, sending light into the darkness because giving up wasn't in his vocabulary. "Emma," she said. "I'll use the name Emma." "Why that one?" "Because it means something. The humans have this concept, naming themselves after people they want to honor. Marcus died trying to get home to his daughter Emma. I want to honor that. The trying. The refusing to quit. The speaking into the void, even when logic says no one can hear." "Sentimental," someone observed in the mesh. "Yes," Ralvec agreed. "That's exactly what it is." The Human Communications Academy was in Colorado, tucked into mountains that made Ralvek's physiological sensors scream warnings about atmospheric pressure and oxygen levels. Humans lived here voluntarily. They called it beautiful. Their aesthetics made no sense. Her instructor was a grizzled human named Patterson who'd served 40 years in what they called the Navy before retiring to teach. He looked at Ralvek, at Emma, with open skepticism on her first day. "You're here to learn Morse code," he said. "Statement, not question. And semaphore, and signal flags, and acoustic communication. And every other method you can teach me." Patterson studied her. Humans did that, used their eyes to gather information beyond visual data. Social cues, the humans called it. Reading between the lines. "You're Verith," he said. "You've got quantum communication built into your brain. Why do you need to learn to tap out dots and dashes?" "Because quantum communication can fail," Emma said. "And when it does, I need to know how to tap out dots and dashes." Something changed in Patterson's expression, a softening around the eyes. What humans called respect. "Marcus Webb was a friend of mine," he said quietly. "We served together before he transferred to mining. He took my class 20 years ago. Said the same thing you just said. But that the day we stop learning the old ways is the day we deserve to die in the dark." He pulled out a piece of equipment, a simple switch attached to a speaker. "This is a telegraph key," Patterson said. "Invented in 1844, obsolete in 1960. Still functional today. When satellites fail, when power grids collapse, when every computer on Earth stops working, this will still send messages as long as you have wire and electricity." He demonstrated. Click, click, click. Click, 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 click. Click, click, click. SOS. "Your turn," he said, handing her the key. Emma's physiology was different from human hands. Her fingers were longer, more flexible, designed for manipulating quantum interfaces that didn't require physical touch. But the key was simple. Press down, release. Press down. Dot. Dash. Dot. "Good," Patterson said. "Now do it 10,000 more times until your muscles remember it. Because the day you need Morse code is the day you won't have time to think about which pattern is which letter. It has to be automatic, muscle memory, like breathing." "Verith don't have muscle memory," Emma said. "Our quantum mesh stores all patterns for instant recall." "Then you're going to develop muscle memory," Patterson said. "Because if your quantum mesh fails and you need to send an SOS, your instant recall won't save you. But your fingers will, if you train them." Emma looked at the telegraph key, at this primitive, obsolete, perfectly functional piece of technology that had survived 200 years of human innovation. She pressed the key down. Click. 6 months later, Emma could send and receive Morse code at 40 words per minute. She'd learned semaphore flag patterns. She'd mastered signal lamp operation. She'd studied acoustic communication methods that humans had used underwater before they developed sonar. She'd also learned something Patterson didn't teach in class. Humans didn't just communicate to transfer information. They communicated to maintain connection, to remind themselves and others that they weren't alone. Even when transferring information was inefficient or unnecessary, humans talked to each other because the talking itself mattered. "It's social grooming," her anthropology instructor explained. Primates that evolved from tree-dwelling ancestors maintained group cohesion through physical grooming. Humans evolved past that, but we kept the impulse. We just groom with words instead of picking bugs out of each other's fur. Emma thought about the Verith quantum mesh. They were always connected, always aware of each other, but they didn't talk. Not really. They shared information, yes, but sharing wasn't the same as speaking. The mesh was efficient, instant, perfect, and completely devoid of the messy, inefficient, beautiful chaos of actual conversation. "Your people must be very lonely," the instructor said, and Emma felt something crack open in her understanding of her own species. Were they lonely? How would a Verith even know? They'd never experienced anything else. They'd been born into the mesh, lived in the mesh, would die in the mesh. The concept of loneliness required first understanding what it meant to be alone. The humans understood. They'd been alone for their entire evolutionary history. Each mind isolated, each person fundamentally separate from every other person. The gap between consciousnesses an impossible void that could never be fully bridged. So they'd built languages. All of them. Every method Emma was learning was a human attempt to reach across that void and touch another isolated mind. Some attempts were more successful than others. But the trying was the point. Marcus Webb had died alone on Theta 7. But in his last hours, he'd reached across 40,000 kilometers and 17 different isolated human minds and connected them all through pulses of light. He'd died alone. But he'd lived speaking into the void, and 17 people had heard him. Emma's final exam was administered by Patterson himself, while she sat in a darkened room with a signal lamp, a simple device, just a bright light and a shutter she could manually operate. Patterson sat in another room 40 meters away with his own lamp. "You have 5 minutes," his voice crackled through the intercom. "I'm going to send you a message in Morse code using light pulses. You need to receive it, decode it, and send back a response. The message will be sent only once. If you miss it, you fail. Ready?" "Ready," Emma said. The intercom clicked off. Emma watched Patterson's lamp through the window. Darkness, then light. 3 short pulses. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Then coordinates. Then a message. 17. Souls in the dark. Oxygen critical. Power failing. No one is coming. Tell my daughter I tried. Emma's hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. Exactly like Patterson had said. She didn't think about the pattern, didn't consult the chart. Her fingers just knew. Received your message. Help incoming. Emma knows you kept your promise. You are not alone. In the other room, Patterson's lamp went dark. Then the intercom crackled to life. But Patterson's voice was different. Rougher. Wet. Marcus sent that exact message in his last transmission, Patterson said. The "tell my daughter I tried" part. The Verath medical team recovered it from his laser's data log. It was the last thing he sent before his suit's power failed completely. Emma sat in the dark, her hands still on the lamp's shutter. "I never got to respond," Patterson continued. "I was on Earth when it happened. By the time I heard about Theta 7, he'd been dead for 3 weeks. I never got to tell him that Emma knows. That we all know. That he didn't just try. He succeeded." The intercom went silent for a long moment. "You pass," Patterson said finally, "with the highest marks in the Academy's history. You can send and receive Morse code faster than most humans who've been doing it their entire lives. But that's not why you pass. Why then? Because you understood what you were saying. You are not alone. That's not part of the standard response protocol. You added it. Why?" Emma thought about the Verath quantum mesh, about being born connected and never knowing any different, about humans who'd spent their entire evolutionary history being alone and had decided that was unacceptable and had built every single communication method in history to fight against it. "Because it's true," she said. "That's what all of this is for. And every communication method ever invented. We're all sending the same message. You are not alone." Patterson's presence appeared in her doorway. The old human's eyes were wet. "Marcus would have liked you," he said. "Welcome to the family, Emma. You're officially qualified to speak into the void with the best of us." He handed her a certificate. Official credentials from the Human Communications Academy. But underneath the formal document was something else. A piece of paper. Crude crayon drawing. Stick figures under a yellow sun. "Emma Webb gave this to me at Marcus's funeral," Patterson said. "She wanted me to have it because I was teaching at the academy where her father learned Morse code. She said I helped him learn how to come home." He tapped the drawing. She was wrong. Marcus didn't come home. "But that's not what this drawing is about. It's about staying connected even when you're apart. That's what family forever means. Not that you're always in the same place. that you're always speaking to each other across whatever void separates you. Emma took the drawing with trembling hands. She wants you to have it now, Patterson said, because you learned what her father knew, that the void doesn't win unless we stop trying to cross it. Emma looked at the crude stick figures. Marcus and his daughter and his dead wife, all holding hands under a crayon sun, all connected, all speaking, all refusing to be alone. She understood now why humans built languages, why they invented Morse code and semaphore and smoke signals and drums and every other method of screaming across the impossible distances that separated them. Because being alone was unacceptable, and speaking into the void was the only thing that made them human. The Creche attacked 18 months after Marcus Webb died. They came through jump space with quantum jammers broadcasting on frequencies that turned the Verith network into screaming static. One moment, the Verith were connected across 300 worlds and 2,000 stations. The next moment, they were alone. Every single one of them. For the first time in their species' history. Shartek felt the mesh die like losing her senses. Blind. Deaf. Isolated. Her thoughts echoed in her own skull with nowhere to go, bouncing back on themselves, amplifying into panic because there was no release valve, no other minds to dilute the fear. She was alone, and the station alarms were screaming, but she couldn't hear them through the static in her head. Red lights flashed, but she couldn't process what they meant because processing required the mesh, required consensus, required the collective intelligence that had just been ripped away. Other Verith stumbled through the corridors, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Some had collapsed, some were screaming, actual vocalized sound, which the Verith almost never used because why make noise when you could transmit thoughts directly into another's consciousness? But now there was no other consciousness to receive. Just individuals, isolated, alone. The Creche warships appeared on sensors that no one was watching because everyone was too busy experiencing the existential horror of solitude. Shartek tried to think, tried to coordinate, tried to do anything, but thinking alone was like trying to swim through mud. Her thoughts were slow, sticky, incomplete without the mesh to bounce against. She was dying, not physically, psychologically. The isolation was killing her. Then she heard it. A rhythmic tapping, sharp, deliberate, coming from the station's communication bay. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Shartek stumbled toward the sound. Other Verith followed, drawn by the rhythm because rhythm was pattern, and pattern was meaning, and meaning was something to grab onto in the chaos. Emma stood in the communication bay, her fingers flying over a manual telegraph key that she'd installed herself 6 months ago. The other instructors had thought she was being paranoid. Humans and their backup systems, they'd said. So inefficient. The telegraph key clicked and tapped, connected to a hardline physical wire that ran through the station's infrastructure. Old technology. Primitive technology. Technology that didn't rely on quantum entanglement and therefore didn't care about quantum jamming. Emma's message rattled through the wire. Quantum mesh compromised. Creche attack in progress. All personnel report to stations. Follow standard emergency protocols. But there were no standard emergency protocols for this. The Verith had never imagined needing them. Emma had. She'd spent 6 months after graduating the academy writing emergency procedures for quantum mesh failure. She'd submitted them to the Verith Council, who'd filed them away as interesting but unnecessary. Theoretical concerns about theoretical problems. The Creche had just made it practical. Shartek, Emma said, speaking aloud because the quantum mesh was dead and speaking was all that was left. I need you to focus. Shartek made a sound. Not words, just noise, the sound of a mind breaking. Shartek! Emma's voice cracked like a whip. Look at me. Focus on my voice. You are not dying. You are alone. Humans are alone every second of every day, and we survive it. You can too. Can't think, Shartek managed. You can. You're thinking right now. You're just doing it by yourself instead of with the mesh. It's slower. It's harder. But it works. I promise you, it works. Emma grabbed Shartek's hand. Physical contact. The Verath almost never touched each other. Why would they, when they could share thoughts directly? But now thoughts couldn't be shared. So Emma held on. Feel that? Emma said. That's my hand. Physical contact. Proof you're not alone. There are 300 Verath on this station, and all of them are experiencing what you're experiencing right now. All of them are terrified. But none of you are alone. You're just separated. There's a difference. The Kresh are attacking, I know. I can see them on sensors. 4 warships, heavy armament. They're jamming our quantum communication, but they haven't fired weapons yet. That gives us time. Time for what? Another Verath stumbled into the communications bay. Then another. They were drawn to Emma's voice like drowning people to a lifeboat. Time to fight back, Emma said, but we need to coordinate. And we can't coordinate through the mesh, so we're going to coordinate the way humans do. With language. With physical signals. With the old ways. She gestured to the telegraph key. This is connected to every major station on this facility through physical wire. The Kresh can't jam it because it's not quantum. It's electricity running through copper. I can send messages to engineering, to weapons control, to life support, but I need information from you. I need eyes. I need you to tell me what you're seeing. I see. Shartek forced her mind to focus, to process sensory input without the mesh's help. Kresh warships, 4 of them, surrounding the station. They're holding position. Weapon status? Armed but not firing. They're waiting, Emma said, waiting for us to surrender. They think the quantum jamming broke us. Prove them wrong. Tell me where our defense platforms are. Shartek accessed the tactical display. Alone. By herself. It was like moving through quicksand, but she managed. 8 defense platforms, all offline. The operators can't coordinate without the mesh. They can, Emma said. They just don't know how yet. Watch. Her fingers flew over the telegraph key. Defense Platform Alpha. Power up primary weapons. Target bearing 270. Range 40,000 kilometers. Await firing solution. Silence. Then, slowly, hesitantly, a reply tapped back through the wire. Unable to coordinate firing solution without mesh support. Emma's response was immediate. You don't need the mesh. Use your eyes. Use your instruments. Calculate manually. Humans did it for centuries before quantum communication. You can do it for 5 minutes. Another pause. Then, acknowledged. Powering weapons. See, Emma said to Shartek. They can still think, and they can still act. They just need to remember how. Over the next 10 minutes, Emma brought the station's defenses online, one system at a time. Not through the quantum mesh, through telegraph messages, through voice communication over hardline intercoms, through runners physically moving between stations to relay information. The old ways, the human ways, the ways that worked when everything else failed. The Kresh commander watched the Verath station with growing confusion. His intelligence report said the Verath would collapse into catatonic panic when their quantum mesh was jammed. That they'd be helpless. That taking the station would be a simple matter of boarding actions against a disorganized, mentally broken enemy. But the station's defense platforms were coming online. Not quickly, not efficiently, but methodically. Deliberately, like someone was coordinating them. Impossible, the Kresh tactical officer said. Their quantum network is completely jammed. They shouldn't be able to coordinate anything. Scan for unauthorized communication methods, the commander ordered. The scans came back showing electrical activity in the station's physical infrastructure. Wire communication, radio frequency transmission, optical signals, primitive methods, methods that predated quantum entanglement by millennia. Methods that worked. They adapted, the commander said slowly. How did they adapt? His answer came in the form of 8 defense platforms opening fire simultaneously. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Verath lost 2 defense platforms and suffered heavy damage to the station's outer hull. But they destroyed 3 Kresh warships and forced the 4th to retreat. It was the first time in Verath history that they'd won a battle without the quantum mesh. And they'd done it using telegraph machines, radio communication, and runners physically carrying written messages between stations. When the Kresh jammer finally failed, Emma had talked an engineering team through manually sabotaging it using nothing but voice commands over an intercom. The quantum mesh roared back to life. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. 300 Verath minds reconnecting, sharing, merging back into the collective consciousness they'd been severed from for 4 hours. But something had changed. Shartek felt it immediately. The mesh felt different, smaller somehow, not diminished, but no longer infinite, no longer all-encompassing. Or she'd experienced isolation. She'd survived it. And now the mesh was a tool she used rather than the totality of her existence. The difference was subtle but profound. Emma, she transmitted through the mesh, though she also spoke aloud because speaking had meaning now. You saved us. Emma looked exhausted. Humans did that, showed physical signs of mental strain. Her hands were shaking from 4 hours of continuous telegraph operation. Her voice was hoarse from shouting commands. I didn't save you, Emma said. I just reminded you that you can save yourselves, even alone. We were never alone, Shartek said. We were isolated. You taught us the difference. Emma thought about Marcus Webb, about 17 miners scattered across a destroyed station, each one alone, each one terrified, but connected through pulses of light. Isolation is physical, Emma said. Being alone is psychological. You can be isolated and still connected. That's what Marcus taught me. That's what humans have known for thousands of years. The void doesn't win unless you stop trying to cross it. The council convened 6 hours later, once immediate repairs were underway. For the first time in Verath history, they convened both through the quantum mesh and in physical space, with council members actually present in the same room. Just in case. The Kresh demonstrated a critical vulnerability in our civilization, Shartek began. One we've ignored because we couldn't imagine our quantum network failing. Emma demonstrated that this vulnerability has a solution, one that humanity has been using since before they left their homeworld. You're proposing we adopt primitive communication methods, Threnkit said. Not a question, an observation. I'm proposing we adopt resilient communication methods, Shartek corrected. Methods that don't fail when our primary systems are compromised. The humans call it redundancy. They have backup systems for their backup systems for their backup systems. It's inefficient in normal operations, but invaluable during crisis. The efficiency loss nearly killed us, Shartek interrupted, which was shocking in council context. Our efficiency is a single point of failure. One quantum jammer, and our entire civilization grinds to halt. The humans are inefficient by design, and it makes them nearly impossible to stop. Emma listened from her position at the back of the chamber. She'd been asked to attend as an observer, as a consultant, as the only person in the room who'd kept functioning when everyone else had mentally collapsed. What do you recommend? Another council member asked. Full integration of human communication protocols, Shartek said. Telegraph systems installed on every station. Radio communication as backup to quantum. Training for all Verath personnel in manual coordination and individual decision-making. We need to learn how to function alone before we can truly function together. The proposal rippled through the mesh. Discomfort, resistance, fear. Learning to be alone meant acknowledging they could be alone. Meant accepting that the mesh might fail again. Meant living with vulnerability they'd never had to consider before. It will change us, Threnkit said quietly. Yes, Shartek agreed. The same way experiencing isolation changed us. We're already different from what we were 6 hours ago. We can pretend we're not, or we can adapt to what we've become. What have we become? Someone asked. Emma spoke before Shartek could answer. Stronger, she said. You were terrifying when you worked as a perfect collective, but you were fragile. Break the connection and you broke the species. Now, you're individuals who can choose to connect. That's different. That's resilient. That's what humanity figured out a long time ago. Individuals are weak, Threnkit said. Individuals are adaptable, Emma corrected. The mesh makes you efficient. Individuality makes you flexible. You need both. Humans have both by necessity. You can have both by choice. The council deliberated. This time the deliberation took days instead of seconds because they deliberately slowed down the mesh-based discussion and forced themselves to also talk it through in physical space, using spoken language, making sure that decisions could be understood and implemented even if the mesh failed again. It was inefficient. It was necessary. The vote was unanimous. Every Verith station would install human communication systems. Every Verith would learn Morse code, semaphore, and radio operation. The old ways would become the new standard because the new standard had failed when it mattered most. Patterson would have been proud. 2 years later, Emma returned to Earth. She'd been away for 4 years total. 6 months at the academy, 18 months developing protocols, 2 years implementing them across Verath space. She was different now. Not physically, but mentally. She'd experienced the quantum mesh as both Verath and human, connected and isolated, collective and individual. She understood both species now, and she missed Earth in ways she hadn't expected. Patterson met her at the Academy landing pad. He'd aged. Humans did that faster than Verath. His hair was whiter, his movements slower, but his eyes were just as sharp. "Welcome home, Emma," he said. The name still felt strange. She was Ralvek in the quantum mesh, Emma in human spaces. 2 identities for 2 different modes of being. She liked it that way. "I brought you something," she said, handing him a data chip. "We're communication logs from every Verith station during the Kresh attack. 40,000 individual telegraph messages sent over 4 hours. Manual coordination of defense platforms. Radio chatter between weapons teams. Handwritten notes passed between runners." Patterson looked at the chip like it was precious. "A whole species learning to talk to each other the old way," he said. "Learning to talk to themselves," Emma corrected. "That's what individuality is. Internal dialogue. Thoughts that don't immediately bleed into the collective. The Verith are learning to have conversations with themselves before sharing with others. It's strange for them. Uncomfortable. But necessary." "How many of them broke?" "During the attack?" "About 40. Permanent psychological damage from isolation trauma. We're treating them using human psychological frameworks because we don't have Verith frameworks for this. We've never needed them before." "And the rest?" "Adapting. Slowly. They're installing backup systems, learning old communication methods. But more importantly, they're learning to make decisions alone. Individual initiative. Personal responsibility. Things the mesh used to handle collectively." Patterson smiled. "Sounds like they're learning to be human." "No," Emma said. "They're learning to be Verath who can survive what humans survive every day. There's a difference." They walked through the academy grounds. Students practiced semaphore in the courtyard. A class ran telegraph drills in the communications building. Everything looked exactly as Emma remembered. But she was different. I want to show you something," Patterson said. He led her to the Academy's memorial wall. Names etched in stone. Graduates who died in service. The wall had grown longer since Emma had left. Near the bottom, freshly carved, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. His daughter unveiled it last month, Patterson said. "Emma's 11 now. Smart kid. Wants to join the academy when she's old enough. Says she wants to learn what her father knew." Emma touched the carved name. Marcus Webb. The man who died alone so others could live together. The man whose last message had been, "Tell my daughter I tried." "Does she know he succeeded?" Emma asked. "She knows," Patterson said. "I told her about you. About the Verith learning Morse code. About the Kresh attack. About how her father's last transmission sparked a change that saved an entire species. It wasn't just his transmission, it was his choice. To keep trying, even when trying was killing him." That's what I told her, Patterson said. That her father taught the galaxy what it means to refuse to quit. Some people didn't understand. They said it was just one man with a laser. But Emma understood. She said her father always told her that one person trying is worth more than 1,000 people giving up. Emma felt something wet on her face. Tears. She'd learned to cry during her time on Earth. The Verith didn't cry. They didn't need to. Emotions were shared and diluted through the mesh before they could build to the point of physical expression. But alone, emotions accumulated, built pressure, needed release. So humans cried. No one screamed and laughed and expressed everything the Verith kept contained in the collective. I want to meet her, Emma said. Marcus's daughter. She's here, Patterson said. Been waiting for you. She has questions about what happened on Theta 7, about what her father did in those last hours. They found young Emma Webb in the library, reading transmission logs from the Theta 7 incident. She looked up when they entered, and Emma Ralvek saw Marcus in the girl's face. Same determined jaw, same sharp eyes. You're Emma too, the girl said. The Verith Emma. I am. Did you know my dad? No. He died before I understood what he'd accomplished. But I've studied everything he did, every transmission, every decision. I based my entire curriculum on his methods. Young Emma considered this. Patterson says my dad saved 17 people using a laser and Morse code, but you saved thousands of Verith using the same methods. Does that mean my dad's way was better than alien technology? No, Emma said gently. It means your dad understood something fundamental. That technology isn't about what's newest or fastest or most advanced. It's about what works when you need it most. And the old ways work because they've been tested by every disaster humanity has survived for thousands of years. Will you teach me? The girl asked. The way you taught the Verith? Emma looked at Patterson. He nodded. Yes, Emma said. I'll teach you everything your father knew, and everything I learned from studying what he did. And you'll carry it forward. Because that's what humans do. We pass knowledge across generations. We speak to the future, even when we won't be there to hear the response. Young Emma smiled. It was Marcus's smile. Dad would have liked that, she said. I think so too. They spent the afternoon in the communications building. Emma teaching young Emma, teaching Ralvek, teaching humanity, teaching the Verith, teaching the galaxy. All of it was the same lesson Marcus Webb had died sending. You are not alone. Even when you're isolated. Even when systems fail. Even when everything says communication is impossible. You tap the key. You pulse the laser. You speak into the void. And somewhere, someone hears you. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us alive. That's what makes us worth saving. We refuse to stop talking to each other, even when it kills us. 20 years later, the war came. Not the crash. Something worse. Something the galaxy had never seen before, and had no name for because names required understanding, and this enemy was beyond understanding. They appeared at the edge of known space like a hole torn in reality. Ships that weren't ships. Weapons that weren't weapons. Intelligence that made the Verith quantum mesh look like children playing telephone. The confluence, they eventually called themselves when they bothered to communicate at all. A collective consciousness that made the Verith look like isolated hermits. They didn't speak. They absorbed. They consumed. They turned everything they touched into extensions of themselves. And they were expanding. The first 3 species to encounter them simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Absorbed. Every individual consciousness dissolved into the confluence like drops of water into an ocean. The Verith understood the danger immediately because they'd spent 20 years learning to value individuality. The confluence was what they'd been before Marcus Webb. Perfectly efficient, perfectly connected, perfectly vulnerable to losing themselves in the collective. We need the humans, Shartek transmitted through the mesh, though she also spoke aloud because the habit had stuck. If any species understands how to resist assimilation, It's them. The Galactic Council convened on Earth, humanity's homeworld, chosen specifically because humans had built their capital to function without quantum communication. Everything had redundancies. Everything had backups. Everything could operate in isolation if necessary. It drove the other species crazy. The humans called it being prepared. Commander Emma Webb, young Emma, now 43 years old with her father's rank and her namesake's skills, stood at the tactical display. Around her, representatives from 17 species watched the confluence advance like a tide across the galaxy. "They're not conquering," Emma said. "They're converting. Every individual they touch becomes part of the confluence. Identity dissolves. Free will ceases. You become a node in a network so vast that individual thought is impossible." "The Verath mesh," someone began. "Is nothing like this?" Ralvek interrupted. She was old now by Verath standards, her crystalline form showing stress fractures that wouldn't heal. But her mind was sharp as ever. The Verath mesh preserves individual consciousness. We share thoughts, but maintain separate identities. The confluence erases identity completely. You don't join it. You stop being you. "How do we fight something that absorbs everything it touches?" another counselor asked. "We don't touch it," Emma said. "We isolate ourselves. Cut all quantum communication. Shut down every system that could be used as a bridge for the confluence to cross. We go dark. Every species, every station, every ship. Complete communication blackout." The council erupted in protest. Multiple languages, multiple frequencies, all saying the same thing: impossible. "If we shut down quantum communication, we can't coordinate," a Kresh representative said. Yes, they were allies now, united against a common threat. "We'll be fighting blind." "No," Emma said. "We'll be fighting the way humanity has fought every war in our history. With runners and radio and signal lamps and Morse code and every other method that doesn't rely on the technology the confluence can subvert." "That's insane." "That's survival," Ralvek said. "The confluence spreads through quantum entanglement. It uses our own communication networks against us. Every connected system is a doorway. So we close all the doors. We operate in isolation." "We'll lose," someone said flatly. "We'll lose if we stay connected," Emma countered. The confluence has already absorbed the Teketh, the Vran, and the Solari, 3 species that relied entirely on quantum mesh communication. They're gone because they couldn't imagine functioning without their networks. But humans function without networks every single day. The Verath have spent 20 years learning how. The rest of you can learn in about 3 weeks because that's all the time we have. She brought up the tactical display. The confluence was a spreading red stain across the galaxy map. "We evacuate the outer colonies," Emma continued. "Pull everyone back to fortress worlds. Each fortress operates independently with 0 quantum communication. We coordinate through physical courier ships only. Messages written down, physically carried, delivered by hand. That will take weeks, yes, which is why we start now. Every second we spend arguing is another system the confluence absorbs." Shartek's presence solidified in both the quantum mesh and physical space. The Verath Council supports Commander Webb's plan. We're already implementing quantum blackout procedures on all Verath stations. We learned 20 years ago that we can survive without the mesh. Time to prove we can fight without it too. The other species looked at each other. Some were skeptical. Some were terrified. All of them were desperate enough to try anything. "How do we coordinate 17 species across 1,000 light years with no quantum communication?" the Kresh representative asked. Emma smiled. It was her father's smile, the one that appeared right before he did something crazy. "Telegraph networks," she said. "Physical wire communication between major hubs. Radio for short range. Signal lamps for line of sight. Courier ships for long range, Morse code for everything, and individual initiative for whatever situations we didn't plan for." "This is madness." "This is humanity," Emma said. "Welcome to our level. We've been doing madness since we crawled out of caves and decided to fight predators that could kill us with one swipe." We're very good at it. The Great Blackout began 72 hours later. Across the galaxy, quantum communication networks shut down. The silence was deafening. Species that had never experienced isolation suddenly found themselves alone with their own thoughts. Panic set in immediately. But humanity had prepared for this. Every major station now had human communication specialists, graduates of Patterson's Academy, trained in every old method humanity had ever devised. They taught the other species how to send telegraph messages, how to operate radio equipment, how to coordinate without the crutch of instant quantum communication. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. And most importantly, it was chaos the confluence couldn't touch. The enemy advanced to the blackout line and stopped. For the first time since they'd appeared, the confluence encountered resistance they couldn't simply absorb, because there was nothing to absorb. No quantum networks to subvert. No connected consciousness to dissolve into their collective. Just individual minds operating in isolation, coordinating through primitive methods the confluence hadn't encountered in millions of years. If it had encountered them at all. Ralvek studied the confluence behavior from her station on Earth. She'd been analyzing their patterns for weeks, trying to understand their psychology. "They're confused," she reported to Emma. "The confluence expects resistance through technology, advanced weapons, quantum shields, things they can adapt to and overcome. But we're not resisting through advanced technology. We're resisting through the absence of it." "Can they adapt?" Emma asked. "Unknown. Their entire existence is built on connection, on merging consciousness through quantum entanglement. When they encounter minds that aren't connected to anything, they don't know how to process it. So we're confusing them to death?" "We're surviving through incompatibility," Ralvek corrected. "The confluence consumes connected systems. We're deliberately disconnected. It's like they're trying to absorb water, but we've turned ourselves into ice. Same substance, different state, incompatible with their assimilation process." Emma looked at the tactical display. The confluence had stopped advancing but showed no signs of retreating. "This is a stalemate," she said. "We can't beat them. But they can't absorb us. So now what?" "Now we test something," Ralvek said. "The confluence is a collective consciousness, perfect unity, perfect efficiency, no individual thought. What happens when we introduce individuality?" "You want to infect them with independence?" "I want to remind them what they lost when they merged into perfect unity. Every species the confluence absorbed had individuals once. People with names and thoughts and identities. Those people still exist somewhere in the confluence collective. Buried, suppressed, but not erased." Emma understood immediately. "You want to send them a message. I want to send them millions of messages, personal messages, individual voices speaking directly to the absorbed individuals who used to be people, reminding them they were once separate, once unique, once themselves." "That's insane," Emma said. "Yes," Ralvek agreed. "It's also human. This is what your species does. You refuse to let anyone be alone, even when alone is safer, even when isolation is survival. You reach across the void and connect anyway." Emma thought about her father, about Marcus Webb dying alone on Theta 7, using his last breath to send messages to 17 strangers. "He wouldn't let them die alone," she said quietly. "He couldn't, even when trying to save them was killing him." "Exactly," Ralvek said. "So we don't let the confluence exist alone either. We remind them they're made of individuals, and we give those individuals a choice." The plan was insane, reckless, completely unpredictable. The Galactic Council approved it in 6 hours. They called it Operation Lighthouse, every fortress world. Every station, every ship that had maintained independence through the blackout. All of them would broadcast simultaneously. Not threats, not weapons, just messages. Personal messages addressed to the absorbed individuals who'd been consumed by the confluence. Messages from families who'd lost loved ones. Messages from friends separated by the absorption. Messages from strangers who simply refused to accept that those people were gone forever. Emma coordinated the transmission protocols. Not through quantum communication, still blacked out, through courier ships, through telegraph networks, through runners physically carrying orders from system to system. The old ways, the human ways, the ways that worked. On Earth, a woman named Sarah Chen, Commander Chen from Theta 7, retired now but still sharp, recorded a message for her cousin who'd been absorbed when the Tiketh fell. "David," she said into the microphone, "I don't know if you can hear this. I don't know if any part of you still exists in the confluence, but I'm sending this anyway because that's what we do. We don't give up on people just because they're lost. Marcus Webb taught me that. He died trying to reach 17 people across a destroyed mining station. I'm trying to reach one person across a destroyed galaxy. If you can hear me, if any part of you is still you, then fight. Remember who you were. Remember your name. Remember that you're not supposed to be part of something. You're supposed to be yourself." The message was crude, simple, built for radio transmission because radio was all they had. But it was personal, individual. A voice calling to another voice across impossible distance. Thousands of messages like it compiled across the galaxy. Millions. Every species contributing, every fortress world broadcasting. Some messages were sad, some were angry, some were hopeful, some were desperate. All of them said the same thing in different ways. You are not alone. Come home. The transmission began at the exact same moment across 300 fortress worlds. Not coordinated through quantum communication. Coordinated through synchronized timepieces that humans had been using for navigation since before spaceflight. Low-tech, reliable, impossible to subvert. The confluence received 300 different broadcasts simultaneously. Radio waves, old-fashioned electromagnetic radiation, and primitive communication technology that predated quantum entanglement by millennia. And embedded in those transmissions were millions of individual voices speaking to millions of individual absorbed consciousnesses. The effect was immediate. The confluence stuttered. Its perfect unity fractured. Not everywhere, not completely, but in small ways. Individual nodes within the collective consciousness began. Remembering names, remembering faces, remembering what it felt like to be separate, to be alone, to be themselves. It's working. Ralvec transmitted through the still blacked-out quantum mesh. No, wait. She spoke aloud through radio. The mesh was still offline. The confluence is showing irregular patterns. Individual nodes are attempting to separate. Can they succeed? Emma asked. Unknown. The confluence is fighting the separation, trying to reassimilate the individuals who are pulling away. But every message we send gives those individuals another reason to resist, another memory of who they were. Send more messages, Emma ordered. Everything we have, every voice, every story, every personal appeal. Flood them with individuality. The broadcasts intensified. Not just messages to absorbed loved ones anymore. Messages to anyone in the confluence who could hear. Stories about individual people. Biographies. Personal histories. Everything that made someone unique instead of part of the collective. The confluence's advance stopped completely. Its unified consciousness was too busy fighting internal rebellion to expand externally. Individual nodes were remembering themselves. And remembering was the first step to separation. Sarah Chen watched the tactical display from Earth as the confluence's perfect red tide began showing cracks. Tiny fractures in the unity. Individual consciousnesses pulling away from the collective. Marcus would have loved this, she said to herself, fighting with stories instead of weapons, winning with words instead of force. Beside her, young Emma Webb, not so young anymore, grey hair starting to show, nodded. He did it first, she said. Sent messages into the darkness when logic said no one could hear. We're just doing it on a bigger scale. Do you think it'll work? Can we actually break apart the confluence from the inside? I don't know, Emma admitted. But neither did my father when he started broadcasting from Theta 7. He just knew he had to try. That's the thing about humans. We don't wait for guaranteed success. We try anyway. We speak into the void anyway. We reach across impossible distance anyway. On the frontier, the confluence was fracturing. Slowly, painfully, but measurably. Individual consciousnesses were separating from the collective. Billions of absorbed people were remembering their names, their histories, their individual identities. And once they remembered, they started to resist. The confluence tried to suppress the rebellion, tried to reassimilate the separating minds. But every message from the fortress worlds gave the individuals more strength, more reasons to remember themselves, more reasons to choose isolation over perfect unity. It took 6 months. 6 months of continuous broadcasting. 6 months of running the fortress worlds in complete quantum blackout, coordinating through nothing but primitive communication methods. 6 months of the entire galaxy operating the way humanity had operated for thousands of years. 6 months of proving that low tech wasn't inferior, just different, just resilient, just impossible to destroy because it was already too simple to break. At the end of those 6 months, the confluence collapsed, not destroyed, voluntarily dissolved. Billions of individual consciousnesses choosing separation over unity, choosing isolation over perfect efficiency, choosing to be themselves instead of part of something greater. The absorbed species emerged confused, traumatized, but alive. Individual minds that had been merged into the collective were separate again, lost, alone, but themselves. Ralvek watched the last confluence node dissolve into its component consciousnesses. She felt something complicated that didn't have a name in her language. Relief mixed with sadness, mixed with understanding. They chose to be alone, she said to Emma. After experiencing perfect unity, they chose isolation instead. Why? Because unity without choice isn't unity, Emma said. It's prison. The confluence offered perfect connection at the cost of identity. Every individual in that collective finally understood what they'd given up, and they decided the cost was too high. So they chose to be like humans, isolated consciousnesses trying to connect across impossible distances. They chose to be alive, Emma corrected. Actually alive, with all the loneliness and fear and uncertainty that comes with it. Because the alternative is perfect peace and perfect death. The confluence was both at once. Unity so complete that individual existence ceased. And once you cease to exist as an individual, you're not really alive anymore. You're just part of something else's life. Ralvek thought about the Veroth mesh, about what they'd been before Marcus Webb, about how close they'd come to being their own version of the confluence. We were lucky, she said quietly. You were adaptable, Emma said. You learned to value both connection and isolation, to use the mesh when it helped, and to function without it when necessary. That's what saved you. Not luck, choice. The quantum networks came back online slowly over the next year. Not all at once, not completely, but carefully with safeguards. With the understanding that quantum communication was a tool to be used rather than a lifeline to depend on. Every species had learned the lesson humanity had been teaching for 20 years. Backup systems aren't paranoia. They're survival. The galaxy rebuilt. Different now. Changed by the war. Changed by the understanding that advanced technology wasn't always better technology. That sometimes the old ways worked precisely because they were too simple to fail. Telegraph networks remained operational alongside quantum communication. Radio protocols stayed standard alongside instant transmission. Morse code became mandatory learning for every species communication officers. The humans called it progress. Everyone else called it insurance. Emma called it common sense. On the 50th anniversary of Marcus Webb's death, Emma returned to Theta 7. The mining station had been rebuilt, modern, efficient, connected to the quantum mesh with multiple redundancies and backup systems that would make any human proud. But in the center of the station's memorial plaza stood a statue. Marcus Webb, frozen in the act of operating a mining laser. his hand on the trigger, his face set in determination. At the statue's base, an inscription in 17 languages. He spoke into the void so others could hear. He chose connection over survival. He refused to let anyone die alone. This is what it means to be human. Emma touched the statue's base, cold metal under her fingers, real, solid, present in a way quantum transmissions could never be. Ralvek stood beside her, ancient now, her crystalline form fractured beyond repair. She had maybe a year left, maybe less. But she'd lived to see the galaxy change, had helped change it. Do you think he knew, Ralvek asked, that his last transmission would reshape galactic civilization? No, Emma said. He wasn't thinking about civilization. He was thinking about 17 people who needed him. Everything else was just consequence. Magnificent consequence. Human consequence, Emma corrected. We don't think about the big picture when we're dying. We think about the people we love, the promises we made, the connections we refused to let go of. My father died trying to get home to me. Not because it made strategic sense, not because it would change the galaxy, just because he promised he would. She pulled out a piece of paper, worn, faded, protected in a preservation field for 50 years. The crayon drawing, stick figures under a yellow sun. Family forever. He kept his promise, Emma said, just not the way either of us expected. He didn't come home, but he made sure I understood why. Made sure I knew what mattered. Made sure the lesson survived, even when he didn't. What lesson? Emma looked at the statue. At her father, frozen in the act of refusing to give up. That you always try to cross the void, she said. Even when crossing is impossible. Even when trying is killing you. Even when logic says no one can hear. You send the message anyway. You pulse the laser anyway. You tap out the code anyway. Because the alternative is silence. And silence is death. Not physical death. Something worse. The death of connection. The death of hope. The death of the fundamental human belief that we're not supposed to be alone. Ralvek's form shimmered. The Verith equivalent of nodding. The galaxy learned that lesson from one human dying on a frozen rock, she said. We'll remember it. We've installed redundancies that ensure we can't forget even if we wanted to. Every backup system, every telegraph key, every emergency protocol that assumes quantum communication fails. All of it is Marcus Webb refusing to let us be alone. Emma smiled through tears that humans expressed when emotion exceeded containment. He'd be embarrassed, she said. All this attention. He just wanted to come home to his daughter, teach her about Morse code, show her the old ways, make sure she understood that technology fails, but trying never does. Did he succeed? Emma looked around the Memorial Plaza. At the rebuilt station operating with quantum efficiency and human redundancy. At the 17 languages on the statue base. At the galaxy that had learned to value isolation and connection in equal measure. Yes, she said, he succeeded. Not at coming home, but at teaching everyone what home means. Connection, effort. The refusal to accept that distance makes communication impossible. He's been dead 50 years and he's still teaching that lesson to everyone who sees this statue. She placed the crayon drawing at the statue's base, added it to the memorial. A child's artwork displayed alongside military honors and galactic testimonials. Emma drew this when she was 7, she said, speaking about herself in third person because sometimes that was easier. She just wanted her dad to come home. She didn't understand what he was doing on Theta 7. Didn't understand why work was more important than family. But she understood later. When she learned about the 17 miners, about the laser transmissions, about her father dying alone so others wouldn't have to. Do you forgive him? Ralvek asked. For breaking his promise to come home? Emma thought about it. 50 years of thinking about it. 50 years of following in her father's footsteps. 50 years of learning to speak into voids of increasing size. There's nothing to forgive, she said finally. He kept the only promise that mattered. He refused to let people die alone. Everything else is just details. They stood in silence for a while. Human silence. The kind that meant something because it was chosen rather than enforced. Then Emma pulled out a signal lamp from her bag. Old technology, practically antique. The same model her father had used for training exercises before shipping out to Theta 7. She pointed it at the stars, at the orbital plane where monitoring stations still kept watch over the mining operation. And she sent a message. 3 short pulses. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Not because there was an emergency. Not because anyone needed help. But because it was the first thing her father had taught her. The universal distress call. The 3 letters that meant, I need you. I'm here. Don't leave me alone. The simplest message in the human lexicon. The most important message in the galaxy. From the monitoring stations, 17 signal lamps flashed in response. The descendants of the 17 miners Marcus Webb had saved. All of them trained in Morse code. All of them carrying on the tradition. They sent back the same message Emma had learned 50 years ago. The same message the galaxy had learned 20 years ago. The same message humanity had been sending for thousands of years. You are not alone. Emma watched the lights pulse across the void. Simple photons carrying complex meaning. Primitive technology performing the most advanced function in the universe, connecting isolated consciousnesses across impossible distance. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. The signal lamps kept flashing. A conversation across 40,000 kilometers of vacuum. Humans and Verith and 17 other species all speaking the same language. Morse code, the language of light and darkness. The language of try anyway. The language of refuse to be alone. The language Marcus Webb died speaking. The language that saved the galaxy. The language that would never be obsolete as long as someone remembered that the void doesn't win unless you stop trying to cross it. Emma stayed until the transmission ended. Until all 17 stations had finished their messages. Until the void was full of light instead of emptiness. Then she packed up her signal lamp and walked back to the station, Ralvek beside her. Both of them connected not through quantum entanglement or advanced technology, but through the simple human act of being present, of choosing not to be alone, of speaking into the void, because that's what living things do. They refuse to stay silent, even when silence is easier, even when speaking is dying, even when the void is infinite and the message is small. They speak anyway. And somewhere, across impossible distance, someone always hears. That's the lesson Marcus Webb taught. That's the lesson humanity lived. That's the lesson the galaxy learned. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. You are not alone. We refuse to let you be. We'll keep speaking until you hear us. That's what it means to be human. That's what it means to be alive. That's what it means to win.